No picture more accurately reflected the man within than the lone figure crouched in front of his cage, his face hidden behind a white perforated mask of his own design. When he introduced the mask to the NHL in 1959, slipping it over a face bearing some 200 stitches, the aging priests of the game were outraged, calling him a coward and his invention a sacrilege. Yet the mask stayed, extending his career and changing the game forever. Here's the story of Jacques Plante, one of the NHL's most intriguing and quixotic figures.
One night I was going in and Jacques had handled the puck and he had passed it off and I was watching where the puck had gone and he just stuck his stick and his hip out and I just went head first into the end boards and I could have really hurt myself.
It's one of the few times he ever really burned over something. He went in the dressing room, took a stick and put it under the door and forced a big curve in it. And he said, I didn't plan to hit Jacques Plante, but I planned to shoot a puck high that did some tricks.
So the next shift, or maybe two later, I went down on the opposite wing and the left wing, and his head was the only thing sitting out on the right side, so I used to give a wrist shot.
And somehow it seemed to scream Plante, and it hit him in the face, and he went down. The goalies have gone down in the past, but nobody ever went down the way Plante went down. And there was a pool of blood, and of course, immediately the trainer was brought out, and it was obvious this was big-time serious.
The game was held up till he went in and got stitched up. We were all just standing around waiting for him to come out.
He had been using the mask in practice, and I guess he told Blake that he wasn't going to come back on the ice without the mask. And Blake had no choice but to let him do it.
He came out with a mask on. Everybody were shocked, but Blake was deadly against it. The coach was Canadian, oh boy. It's a funny thing to see, a guy down the other end with a mask on.
It was a disgusting-looking thing that could well have been from a grade B horror movie or a sci-fi flick. It turned everybody off. At the same time, it arrested your attention because it had never been seen before. And of course, we all realized that this was a monumental moment in the history of the game.
I told him, I says, he looked better in the mask anyway.
With his model vastly improved over the facial protection mask worn by injured goaltender Clint Benedict for 2 games in 1930, the masked Plante turned away 24 more shots as the Canadians beat the Rangers 3-1.
In this case, Plante won the Battle of the Wills, but he hardly won the war because as soon as the game was over and we talked to Plante, it was clear that Blake considered it a one-shot and Plante decided that he'd proved a point.
It's been such a macho game for so long that when he wanted to wear the mask, Jacques said he told Blake, saw that as a sign of fear, that he no longer could look the shooters in the eye and face the puck and wondered if he'd lost his edge. And he took a lot of criticism over that.
Toe Blake was the ultimate macho coach. So when Plante came up with the idea of wearing a mask, that was considered effeminate. What the hell are you doing? Goalies don't wear masks. You're not tough enough to play with the way other goalies? What the hell's the matter with you?
He wore the mask close to Halloween night, and it seems to me I can remember a headline in a newspaper that said, you know, Plante wears mask, but Halloween's over now, Jacques. And that was the kind of reaction that it had.
Jacques was pretty stubborn, and stubborn enough to say he's going to keep wearing a mask.
This wasn't the 90s. This wasn't the turn of the century. Athletes didn't do what they thought was best for them. They did what the coach told them.
He announced that he planned to wear it in the next game, and once again, you know, it was the irresistible force against the immovable object being Blake. And Blake assumed, as a lot of people did, that you really couldn't survive a game and win wearing this stupid thing. And what happened was that Plante not only won the next game, but he won the game after that, and the game after that, and the game after that.
Extending his unbeaten string with the mask to 11 games, Plante proved his point. Not only was it effective, but the device was life-altering for hockey's most stressful position.
goal just was a very hectic place to play. I was a goaltender here in Toronto on a team that won in 1945 named Frank McCool, who had a stomach full of ulcers. He had to drink milk by the quart to be able to cope with the NHL goaltending.
Charlie Rayner with the Rangers there, the puck was deflected and he got the puck right square in his teeth. Took all his teeth out. He went in the dressing room and they pulled the loose ones out and broke off the cracked ones and give him a gauze pad to chew on. He came out and finished the game.
In my first game with the Maple Leafs as a young goaltender, I got 10 stitches over the eye. The next morning, I got 5 stitches under the eye, and that's when I really, holy smokes, what's going on here?
The crowd was cheering, and I went down, and the back of his skate came up and ripped me for 45 stitches. Pulled 2 of my molars out at the same time, and the doctor came in and stitched out, and he said, okay, out you go. So I had to go and finish the game.
I have one head, Plante told a reporter, and I plan on keeping it.
The thing that I remember when I was young is people coming at home, and I remember being there and, and I asked him, why do you put that on your face? Because, you're the only one. He says, well, you see that nose here, how it's crooked and how this and this and this? Well, this is to protect.
He's a sissy. He's going to wear a mask now. He's going to wear a helmet. And this is the thought in those days. This is how the thinking was. We didn't know any better, I guess.
I wanted to wear a mask. And maybe my subconscious stopped me from wearing a mask because of what the opinion might be of, look at this sissy.
They'd be going up there and saying, what now, pretty boy? You trying to protect that nose or something like that? We're going to go right up your throat and different things like that. And it didn't make any difference anyways because Jacques would still keep on going, playing what he was capable of doing.
Jacques Plante wore it in games, and he was no sissy, because you still get hurt if they hit you in the mask, but it does save your vision.
He didn't wear a mask, I think, so much because he was afraid, because it was a sensible thing to do. He once said if you jump out of a plane without a parachute, it doesn't make you brave. You play goal with a mask, it doesn't make you a coward.
I don't think that the goaltenders there had the confidence to put it on there and still be able to compete with the best. When there's only 6 goaltenders and the pressure's on every single night to win 1-0 or 2-1, you can't afford to make a mistake.
It wasn't until the mid-1960s that the mask became widespread. Plante had revolutionized the goalie position, taking it into the modern era.
Jacques grew up poor in Quebec. I remember once doing a story on Christmas memories of various athletes and asked him what his most vivid memory of Christmas as a boy was, and he said ginger ale. And the only time they ever had like a carbonated drink in the house back then would be on Christmas Eve, and Father would bring home a glass of ginger ale, and they'd all have a glass around the Christmas tree the way more affluent people drank champagne.
Born the oldest of 11 on January 17, 1929, Jacques Plante grew up in Shawinigan Falls, Quebec, where his father was a machinist.
Jacques, being the oldest, had to help his mother with the young children. He even changed diapers, did mending. Later in life, of course, he continued that. He used to help his mother with cooking.
He grew up poor and was very proud of it, that he'd learned a lot of good lessons from it. He wasn't deprived, but just there wasn't a lot of money there. So it also taught him to value a dollar. Jacques was, I guess the word is, careful with money.
So a lot of what he was known for as an individualist later in life, the seeds were planted as a young child.
During his free time, Plante was also sowing the seeds of his athletic future, which didn't have to be hockey.
He even mentioned it, that he was better in baseball than hockey. And if it would be like today with all the drafting that we have here in Montreal, he would have probably played baseball.
Jacques was really a good basketball player, ping pong player too. He was a natural athlete.
But the pull of Canada's game was too forceful. Originally cast as a defenseman in school, Plante became a goalie only after severe bouts of asthma dictated that he not skate hard and fast.
They were so poor they didn't have a radio. The gentleman who lived in the apartment upstairs had a radio. And during radio broadcasts of the Montreal Canadiens games, Jacques used to stand on the bureau in his sister's bedroom and listen to the game.
He used to play hockey in the arena, and if it's not in the arena, it was outside on a ring outside and playing in the streets summertime. Even his sister, when no one wanted to play with him, he was asking her sister to shoot at him, even if she was a girl.
The rink rat of Shawinigan Falls was playing on 3 teams, each at a different skill level.
You know, Pee-wee, Bantam, and midget. Maybe he was 10 and he was playing with kid that might have had, at the time, 15, 16, 17 years old, and he was still managing the game. After high school, Plante signed for $85 a week with the Quebec Citadels of the Quebec Junior A League. And by May of 1949, he had married Jacqueline Gagne, with whom he would have 2 sons. He wasn't really fond of hockey. When she met my father, you know, her sister says, well, it's Jacques Plante, he's playing for Quebec. And says, who's he? Soon, everyone in Quebec knew Jacques Plante. An all-star as a rookie, he allowed just 101 goals in 48 games. In 1949, Plante signed with the Montreal Royals, the top farm team of the legendary Canadiens. For 2 years, he excelled in the minors. But with only 6 teams in the NHL, Plante had to wait his turn.
When you took all the goaltenders in hockey and distilled them down into those 6 jobs, it meant the standard was very high.
You spend time in the senior leagues, the American Hockey League, the Western Pro Hockey League, wherever they'd send you, and wait for your opportunity for somebody to either get hurt, lose their nerves, or get old.
In October of 1952, Plante was called up to the Canadiens when goalie Jerry McNeil's cheekbone was broken by a flying puck. But before making his debut against the Rangers, he took on Coach Dick Irvin over the appropriateness of his self-styled headgear.
In those days, in the rinks in the province of Quebec, they were freezing, and it was important for the goaltender, who wasn't moving around as much as the other players, to keep his head warm. So that's why he wore the toque.
And everybody, what's this guy with a toque on playing in junior hockey? And he knitted them himself. And he'd come out and somebody'd say, knock his hat off. He was more worried about his toque than he was about the puck. So everybody went after his toque after a while.
And my dad, he said if he's going to play in the National Hockey League, he's got to take off his toque. So there was a great hue and cry in the press that Irvin was being very cruel to this young man, and he was going to put him right off his game by making him take off this beloved toque of his.
The game was so traditional that a toque was seen as revolutionary.
The toque was not seen anymore in NHL games, which was unfortunate and stupid on the part of Irvin and the powers that be, because it was such a colorful thing, and it symbolized what kind of special character that Jacques Plante was.
It was hats off to the toqueless Plante as he played brilliantly, going undefeated in his 3-game trial. After being sent back to the minors, Plante rejoined the Canadiens as Jerry McNeil's backup for the 1953 playoffs.
Chicago had the lead in the series 3-2 going back for Game 6 in Chicago. My father, coaching the team, decided he had to make some changes, and he changed about 5 players that night. I remember he called home and he said, if we lose this game tonight, I'm going to get fired. So he changed 4 players up front, and he changed the goaltender. He took McNeil out and he put Plante in. Jacques had never played a playoff game, and that morning, he said my father came by him in the hotel lobby, and he just said to him very casually, you're playing tonight, and you're going to get a shutout.
True to Irvin's word, Plante shut out Chicago in the must-win 6th game. Then, after backstopping the Canadiens to a 4-1 7th-game victory, Plante split the goalie duties with McNeil as Montreal defeated Boston for the Stanley Cup. In early 1954, Plante took over the goaltender's job.
I think it was a Wally Pip, Lou Gehrig kind of thing. McNeil was having troubles and not feeling well, and he took a night off, and Jacques, who was more than ready to play, took over and kept the job for the next decade.
With the job came criticism from the fans for his wandering style of play.
Goalies weren't supposed to leave the crease. If you ever had one of those rod hockey games as a kid where the goalie moved back and forth, that was literally the extent of movement by the goalies. Jacques Plante changed that.
Before he got to the NHL, he played with a team that had stone-handed defensemen. And he said he could skate very well and he had good hands. It was much safer for me to get the puck and clear it to the forwards than to let these stone hands in defense give it to the other team.
As he started to roam, the people in the Montreal Forum didn't like that. They would yell at him, réveille-toi, wake up. And someone asked him, aren't you annoyed by this? Your home fans tormenting you. And he just said dismissively, like a haughty wine steward or something, they play high school, I play the pros.
I'm sure Jacques Plante for years watched these pucks go around the net that he could set up for his teammates that instead would go to his opponents, sometimes would lead to goals, and asking himself, why don't I just go out these few feet and do something with the puck, and it would prevent all kinds of goals. And finally, he crossed the threshold and decided to do it.
Well, what initially happened when he first decided to come out and play the puck, he would freeze the puck, especially in key situations. If the Canadians had a lot of pressure on them and he wanted to start with a face-off, Jacques was the first goalie that would stop play. In fact, the league had to make a rule that a goaltender could not stop play from back of his goal line.
Well, Jacques, at the start, used to just come out of the net, go behind, and leave it there for you, and then go right back into the net. And, well, you see everybody copying that now, but nobody copied it for a while because they weren't the good puck handlers there. And the skater, he was an exceptionally good skater, too.
To put it into context how great a skater Jacques Plante was in his heyday, one season during training camp, they had a skating competition between the Montreal players. Henry Richard won the skating contest. Of course, Richard was a great skater. Jacques Plante came in third with full goalie gear.
He created the position of goaltender as almost a third defenseman, as somebody involved in the breakout play, as somebody who takes steps to cut off shots before they can be taken.
After finishing third in the NHL with a 2.11 goals against average, Plante and the Canadians lost to Detroit in the 1955 Stanley Cup Finals. Toe Blake replaced Dick Irvin as coach, and with Henri Richard joining his brother Maurice, Jean Beliveau, Bernie Geoffrion, and Doug Harvey, a dynasty was born, with Plante minding the castle.
A lot of the credit went to the defense, led by Doug Harvey, Tom Johnson, and the terrific forwards they had, but Plante also delivered, and he delivered well.
Tommy Johnson, who I'm pretty close to, he said, you knew if you got a goal, and if you ever got 2 goals, forget about it. You had a win with Jacques Plante in goal.
Plante, once he got into the groove in 55, 56, there wasn't anybody better than him because he took his athleticism and combined it with a kind of cerebral technology in that he mastered the art of the angles.
Nobody ever studied a job more than he did. What he considered to be his best saves were the ones where he didn't touch the puck, where he played the angle perfectly, and if the shooter missed him, he missed the net. And before long, other goalies were studying his technique to take the net away from the shooter.
My recollection of him is this very agile, dancer-like goalie. Most goalies played kind of as a block, and their physical shape, was more like a block, and their movements would be short and abrupt. Jacques Plante was fluid.
Jacques Plante was excellent at playing his angle. He had figured out his rhythm, that when the shooter was at a certain spot, he would give him very, very little, instead of relying totally on his reflexes.
We all imitated him. Occasionally, we used to go in the net, because he took turns. And then, okay, this is Jacques Plante. He's coming out to block the angles, and then he kick save.
He was innovative. I think he studied the opposing players as much as possible, but he got down in such a low crouch. He almost looked between the defenseman's legs to find the puck.
He had a steady movement all the time. Like the 5-hole on him was impossible because it's the only hole that keeps moving.
Probably one of the first goalies to keep a book on the opposition shooters and tendencies and what they were likely to do. Just a very thorough professional approach.
The meticulousness of his preparation. So many turns of the tape around the top of the stick, 17 turns of the tape around the blade of the stick, so that the weight and the balance of the stick would never change. He'd get its skate sharpened once a year at exactly the halfway point. He would cut his fingernails, his toenails on certain days. There was not a part of goaltending that Jacques Plante had not thought about and analyzed, formed his own opinion, and then blocked out the rest of the world.
Take, for example, a game when he's playing in the Chicago Stadium and he gives up 2 early goals, and he's thinking that the nets are too big. Now, the guys on his team between periods are thinking, the net's too big, come on. Well, he eventually has the nets measured, and the nets were a little higher than normal.
He also was very good, I think, in winning games under pressure. He seemed to be able to know his team needed a championship, and he'd find a way to get it for them.
In 1960, Plante won his 5th consecutive Vezina Trophy, and Montreal took its 5th straight Stanley Cup as it went 8-0 against Chicago and Toronto. Plante was particularly stingy, allowing 1.38 goals per game and posting 3 shutouts. In September, however, the Canadiens' leader, Rocket Richard, retired.
In 60-61, they were reforming without the Rocket. And as luck would have it, when they went into the playoffs, they met a very tough Chicago team. Chicago team not only beat the Canadiens in that opening round, they beat the crap out of them physically.
After the 1961 shellacking, Canadiens defenseman Doug Harvey was traded to the New York Rangers. Amid mournful stories that the dynasty was no more, Plante found renewal.
Here's the best defenseman in hockey being traded away, and Plante said, I'm going to prove that it wasn't just Doug Harvey. I'm going to show just what a good goaltender I am. And he did. And he ended up winning the Hart Trophy as the most valuable player in the league. Had maybe his greatest year.
I had seen him play 4 or 5 times that year, and I was thinking, I've never seen Plante play better than this. I saw Sawchuk, I saw Lumley, I saw Glenn Hall. I've seen really a lot of the great goaltenders, and I never saw anyone have a year like Jacques Plante had that year.
Just 1 year later, Plante learned that even a decade of superb play doesn't necessarily earn loyalty in the NHL.
Goalies have always been loners because goalies are a different type of people. They walk to their own drummer.
One of Jacques Plante's infamous quirks was an asthma condition that the Montreal trainer diagnosed as 90% mental, since it seemed to bother him only in Toronto.
Toronto had a pretty good team at that time, too, and he didn't like to play here.
He stayed up in the Westbury Hotel, I believe, close to Maple Leaf Gardens. The rest of us stayed in the Royal York Hotel.
And, you know, it's a team game, and I don't know what's the difference between one hotel and the other.
As resentment built among his teammates, Plante insisted that the repeated asthma attacks were the cause of his odd behavior.
I remember him talking at home saying, well, I can't go to that hotel. I don't know what's wrong with that hotel, but I can't go there. So he was really allergic to whatever contaminant that was in the air. In those days, it was, you're a man, you shouldn't have any problem on that.
We'd have a meeting 11 o'clock the morning of each game, and he'd come up to Blake and say, I got asthma. I don't think I can play. So you'd have to scurry around, get a junior goaltender or some kind of a goaltender.
Blake was very systematic, and, you know, he wanted to know ahead what he was about to do, and with my father, sometimes it wasn't always easy.
But one time we're in New York, and 11 o'clock meeting, and Jacques says, you got the asthma again, asthma attack. Blake says, how in the heavens can you get an asthma attack here? He says, I dreamt I was in Toronto.
Blake, any tremendous person that's innovative and creative, he was a little bit eccentric.
Jacques was a little different, as they say. We really didn't understand him that much, and you couldn't get close to him. He just didn't open up to anyone.
Even when you talked to him, he never really talked, if you know what I'm saying. He talked to you, but it was like he wasn't there, so to speak. He was thinking about other things, but he just was that kind of guy. He was a standoffish kind of guy.
He told a writer, I haven't made any close friends since I was a teenager. What do you need friends for? If you have friends, you're always rescheduling yourself to suit them.
The Canadiens slipped to 3rd place in 1963 and lost in the first round of the playoffs. Although Plante's performance remained as high as ever, his quirkiness was getting to Toe Blake.
The relationship between Coach Toe Blake and goaltender Jacques Plante was at best strained.
Toe came from the old school out of the mines in northern Ontario that you showed up and played and kept your mouth shut and didn't complain. And Jacques was never that way. He wasn't afraid to say if he didn't feel right. And I think that aggravated Blake. He said, if we don't get this guy out of here, he's going to drive me nuts. And that led to their split.
When a team wins 5 cups in a row, the fans are spoiled. They expect more. And when they don't get it, they look for scapegoats. Plante, of course, was a perfect subject for him because Plante was wearing the mask, and he hated the mask every time he looked at it.
But there were other, even more infuriating signs of Plante's individualism.
Jacques was very careful with his money. Jacques invested in real estate. Jacques made money on the outside, and if there's anything management of that era hated in a player, it was financial independence. So Jacques, while he needed his hockey salary, probably didn't need it as much as other players did. And so he could stand up to management. But I also think there was a deep streak of contrariness somewhere in Jacques, and why that was there, I don't know.
The fact that he had split with Blake, the fact that they were less than the team that they had been, made it possible for them to think about trading him.
Plante was traded to New York in a 7-player deal that included popular Rangers goalie Gump Worsley.
For him, it was like, a slap in the face, but he was still proud, and he sort of said, well, I'm still going to be the #1, and I'm going to do anything to prove them that they made a mistake.
When Plante was traded to the Rangers, there was a great deal of excitement. Nobody was upset about Worsley leaving. The great Jacques Plante was coming down.
Plante shut out Detroit in New York's home opener, stopping 34 shots.
Plante's first game was like a major event. Show me, what can you do for us? He played so well. Plante was theatrics, arms up, playing to the crowd, which was great when you were winning. And he did do that, and he was welcomed for that aspect.
But Plante's act didn't play well. The Rangers won only 22 of 70 games, with their new netminder giving up almost 3.5 goals a contest.
Plante's welcome began to fade when the club started to lose, and it was not a good team in front of him.
When you gave up a rebound, possibly in Montreal, it was cleared. In New York, it wasn't. Somebody was tucking it in behind him, and you could lose confidence in your ability to stop pucks.
Plante had moved to New York without his family, and his suburban living accommodations were substandard for the new star of the Rangers.
Camille Henry and Jacques Plante became roommates, and they found a place they could so dumpy. I couldn't believe they accepted to live there. They were rats, like in their apartments. There were cockroaches.
As age crept into his legs, Plante split the next season between Madison Square Garden and the Rangers farm team in Baltimore. When the Blue Shirts again failed to make the playoffs, Plante's enthusiasm ran toward empty.
The goaltending business is very hazardous to the mind as well as the body. And he'd been through a lot, believe me, because having to play for Blake and Irvin and then coming to New York with the shabby Ranger team, that could wear anybody down, and it wore Jacques down.
In a year and a half, he went, from the penthouse down to the other house there, and I think that his skills were probably still there. There's no doubt about it, but I just think that the general idea of playing in New York just didn't agree with him at all.
Living in a Montreal suburb, Jacqueline Plante's spirits sank without her husband. When she asked him to come home, he was ready. Just 3 years after winning the Hart Trophy, Plante retired at 36. In December of 1965, junior Canadian team coach Scotty Bowman asked Plante to come out of retirement and play against the Soviets, who were touring North America.
It was quite a challenge at that time because the Soviets had never played the pros, and we were still an amateur team, a junior team, but we added the one ingredient that we won the game with. The goaltending means so much in a hockey game that we ended up winning the game because of Jacques.
Jacques played an enormous game, just like he probably made 20 stops that he couldn't have been faulted on if they had beat him. Among individual games, you remember, that's one that really stands out.
That's the best game I've ever seen in my life, because he had 3 breakaway in the last minute, and he stopped all of them.
There were 15,000 people in the Forum that night, and they went nuts. They just, everybody was talking about how good Jacques Plante was. How can he still be this good when he hasn't played hockey for almost a year?
As GM and coach of the fledgling St. Louis Blues in 1968, Bowman looked north to Quebec for a #2 netminder.
We had a top goalie in Glenn Hall, but we knew he couldn't play probably more than 40 games, 50 of the max, and we had difficulty, getting a goalie that could play another 35, 40 games. So Jacques had announced to everybody at the June meetings that he was desirous of a comeback.
Bowman's experiment was the equivalent of platooning Willie Mays with Mickey Mantle.
At first, I thought it would be deadly and a big mistake, but Plante shaped up enough, and the tandem was so perfectly orchestrated by Bowman, knowing when to put one and when to put the other in. And to Plante's credit, he blended perfectly with Glenn Hall.
And they got along very, very well. There's no animosity towards each other. There was good competition amongst each other. They didn't want to lose.
I think they combined for 13 shutouts and also 22 one-goal games. And we had the lowest goals against in the league in 1968-69 for the previous 11 years.
Winning the West by 19 points, Plante and Hall shared the 1969 Vezina Trophy.
I think they were both very proud of it. It was an accomplishment that they were used to doing it on their own. Now they shared the glory, and they really felt good about it, and they felt good about each other.
At that point in their lives, they were past any ego clashes, and it seemed they enjoyed it to the hilt, although they never were fast friends or anything of that nature. They got along extremely well and did the job and got their names in another Vezina Trophy, which was remarkable.
He was much more into making friends with the crowd in those days. After a game, he'd throw his arms up in the air and he'd do a little pirouette. And the crowd was much more friendly to Jacques than had been the crowd in the Montreal Forum.
He had a habit of raising his arms in victory and skating off the ice like this. And you can ask any goaltender at that time, you just love to beat him and cross paths with your arms in the air, right? But the problem was you never beat him very often. I talked to Eddie Jackman about it once too, and he did it a couple times. He drives you to do that. And believe me, it's just all jealousy because of how great he was.
In 1970, the Blues again emerged as West champs, and Plante carried his teammates to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Glenn Hall started the playoffs, got injured in the first game, and Jacques had to come right off the bench. And we won that game, and then we won 7 straight. We swept both Philadelphia and Los Angeles, and we were at the top of our game.
The Blues' hopes against the Bruins crashed when Plante was injured in Game 1.
Freddie Stanfield took a shot, I think, from the left point on a power play, and it was tipped up into Jacques' face. And Jacques was out, and it was obvious that he was hurt very bad. I read later that he said, the mask saved my life.
7 days later, Bobby Orr's famous flying goal capped a Bruins 4-game sweep. After the playoffs, the Blues dealt Plante to Toronto. At 42, he led the NHL with a 1.88 goals against average and was named a second-team All-Star. He also began to work with a young goalie named Bertie Perron.
Perron almost hero worshipped with Jacques, and probably their year together here made Perron into one of the great goalies who ever played.
Spending a year and a half with him really made a big difference. I got to understand the game a lot better. Coming back with the Flyers after 2 years, then I was ready to help them win the Stanley Cup.
In those 2 years with Philadelphia, it was just almost Jacques Plante playing for the Flyers, only his name was Bernie Perron.
In 1972, Plante's marriage ended in divorce. Then, with the Maple Leafs struggling, Plante was traded to the defending champion Bruins in 1973. Again, Plante, at 44, found young legs, going 7-1 down the stretch.
He was very good for a very long period of time. I almost compare him to Gordie Howe. We all marvel at Gordie Howe's longevity and how long he played the game. He was in his 50s. Well, Jacques wasn't in his 50s. But considering the position he played, the level of his play, for as long as he kept at that, is really in a class by himself.
Despite his remarkable skills, his take-charge attitude rubbed the Bruins elite the wrong way.
I went to WHA and Plante ended up in Boston, and it was sort of a time of chaos for him. I don't think he got along with anyone. I guess he tried to really, engineer the whole team. When you've won a couple of championships and everything, you don't need some goaltender, no matter how good he was, to tell Bobby Orr where to stand, or tell Phil Esposito where to stand, or tell Derek Sanderson what to do. Just get in there and play.
Despite allowing 10 goals in 2 playoff games in 1973, Plante turned down a Boston offer and signed a 10-year, $1 million contract as GM and coach of Quebec of the World Hockey Association. Although the Nordiques finished 2 games over 500, Plante resigned after the season.
And my dad said, I remember saying, he's going to be a good coach someday. Well, he wasn't a good coach. And I guess the reason is he wasn't a people person. He may have been able to impart the knowledge, but I think when it came to handling the personnel of a hockey team, as in his role of coach, manager, whatever, he was found lacking.
And at a league meeting in Chicago, he said, Bill, I'm thinking of coming back and playing again. I'd like to play for you. And I laughed and I said, sure, Jacques. But the next morning at breakfast, he said, Bill, I'm serious. I'm going to leave Quebec. I'm not enjoying it, and I'd like to come and play for you next year.
It was a bit of a gimmick, I'm sure. I don't know if anybody expected him to carry us to the league championship or anything. That was a good deal for the fans.
By this time, he was roughly equivalent to what Satchel Paige was when he was playing for Cleveland. To have the greatest goalie wind up in a situation where he's almost a burlesque performer going from theater to theater based on his name. For Jacques Plante to go from being in the front office and then back with the Edmonton Oilers, well, that was really the pits.
In Edmonton, Plante's presence increased the Oilers' attendance significantly. His career ended in the virtual obscurity of the WHA after losing his equilibrium when a shot struck him on the ear. Then, in the fall of 1975, tragedy struck deep into the Plante family. His younger son, Richard, was 19 when he committed suicide.
And I give him a call saying Richard's dead. So he says, let me call you back. And he just hang up, and then he called back about 15 minutes after. So that period of time, he probably cried a lot. It really hurt him because he wasn't there at the time.
He was devastated by it, but being such a quiet man, he never made any public announcement or pronouncement about it, and very few people knew.
When SportsCentury returns, Jacques Plante mentors an entire generation of goaltenders and is remembered for his innovations, courage, and greatness. Having made a small fortune marketing his mask, Plante divided his retirement years between a home in Sierre, Switzerland, and coaching hockey in North America.
I went to a baseball game with one of my kids, and he was there, and I went to my seat, and he came over and sat beside me. I was shocked. How you doing? How are things going? This and that. But he mellowed, you know, with age. I went out of the ball game, and I said, that's not the Jacques Plante I used to know.
After he retired, he came back with the Flyers and worked with me for a few years, and again, really helped me because you don't graduate as a goalie. There's always room for improvement, and Plante was a tremendous teacher.
He wrote a book on goaltending, worked with an editor, but not a ghostwriter, so the book was really his product. Just a book on goaltending that became like the master textbook for a generation of goalies.
There was one Bible when it came to stopping pucks, and it was Jacques Plante, and it was Jacques Plante's book.
I was up in Tommy Barasso's house, and I saw this dog-eared old copy just absolutely falling apart of Jacques Plante's book. And Tom said, yeah, it's falling apart because I read it so often. It's still the Bible.
In 1985, Plante celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Canadiens' 5-Cup dynasty with his teammates at the Forum. In January of 1986, he signed his last NHL contract as goaltender coach for the Blues. A month later, he was diagnosed with stomach cancer.
He wasn't keeping his meal, so after 2-3 days not feeling well, I went to see the doctor, and he says, well, okay, I can't see what you got. Let's take a biopsy.
So I bumped into him the winter before and noticed that he had really aged, that he always looked such a picture of health. It was just such a shock to hear to everybody because it just sort of fell out of the sky that all of a sudden he's got cancer. It's serious.
So he went back to Switzerland to get operated over there because he knew a lot of doctors over there that were very good, and they just opened it up, and a week after, I mean, he died because they couldn't do nothing on it.
Jean Beliveau flew over to represent the Canadians at the funeral, which was held in Europe. And in the area where he was living at the time, there was a hockey tournament, kids hockey tournament, and there was a team from Quebec that was competing. So they arranged for, at the funeral, for these kids to stand outside the church and put their hockey sticks up, like this. And Jacques' casket went. I found that very touching.
In 1995, the Canadians paid the ultimate tribute to the masked marvel. Number 1 was retired.
I'll remember Plante for being a superb goaltender who helped the Canadians win 5 straight cups and who was a special type of character.
I think of all the athletes, great and small, that I was fortunate enough to meet, and the few that I got to know, he was one of my favorite people because he was such an interesting man. He was interested in politics, he was interested in books, he was interested in sport and food and money, and just kind of an unforgettable character.
He had the intestinal fortitude to find a way to put a mask on because people called him a coward, if you can imagine. And how right he was and how wrong they were.
And every time a goalie leaves the crease to play the puck, 50 years from now, he will owe a debt of gratitude to Jacques Plante.
He changed the position of goaltending the way Bobby Orr changed the position of defense.
There are a lot of very good goalies. There are even a fair number of great goalies, but there aren't very many important goalies. And Jacques Plante was an important goalie.
Plante's impact on the game is forever.
Plante won 434 NHL games, a record 7 Vezina trophies, and led the league in goals against average 9 times. In 1978, he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Although his invention has saved countless lives, Plante seemed cold and removed. Of the hundreds of teammates he had, only one, Jean Beliveau, attended his funeral in Switzerland. For ESPN Classics Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.